The Ming dynasty was one of the most influential and powerful dynasties in Chinese and even global history. But did you know that the Ming could have been more powerful, more influential, and more colonial? China could have possessed a colonial empire just like Britain or Spain. But why didn't they? Well, in order to understand why China didn't colonize, we gotta go back to 1405 when the Yongle Emperor was in charge. At this point, he only ruled for about 3 years, but this random dude named Zheng He convinced the emperor to authorize 7 voyages from 1405 all the way to 1433. Later, in August 12th, 1424, the Yongle Emperor passed away due to a stroke, leading to the ascension of Hongxi Emperor, who halted all naval voyages due to economic concerns and him wanting to defend the north. He died 75 days later. The Xuande Emperor authorized the 7th and last naval voyage of the Ming Dynasty in 1430, where Zheng He later died either of the coast of India in 1433 or in Nanjing, China in 1435. Really depends on who you ask. But what if that changed? What if, in an alternate timeline, China never stopped these naval voyages, instead making the Chinese explore and discover more and more lands to trade with and eventually colonize? One way we can have the Ming continue their naval expansion by having the Yongle Emperor survive for a few more years so he could authorize more naval voyages under Zheng, and for Zheng to indisputably survive his 7th voyage so he could lead more voyages. This means that China will be able to expand their naval and diplomatic influence across the Eastern Hemisphere, and for them to secure tons of trade goods, enriching the Ming in the process. Now, eventually, the Yongle Emperor will likely die in the late 1420s or early 1430s, and Zheng will likely pass away in the late 1430s or early 1440s. This means that future emperors, sometime in the 1460s, will probably authorize the first colonial expedition due to gaining the money and resources from trading with other nations. Now, where would the Chinese land first? I'd expect them to land in Taiwan, or what they called Formosa, because it's the closest to the Chinese mainland. And also because it was and still very strategic for China. But if you're enjoying my content so far, consider subscribing. Here are some videos that I'll be releasing in the future, so if you want to see them, make sure you subscribe. Anyways, back to the episode. Taiwan's only resources at the time were the trees for wood and deer for deer hide, which wouldn't be too useful to China. So they would go on their next adventure, Southeast Asia, in the early 1470s. This region would be a lot more resource-rich compared to Taiwan, due to having spices, rice, metals, salt, ivory, etc. This would promote more Chinese settlement to the region due to said settlers wanting to exploit these riches for themselves. The Ming court would benefit heavily off of the colonization of Southeast Asia, and all Chinese emperors and officials would realize that maybe this colonies thing was a good idea after all. We now move on to the early to mid 1500s, the decade, where China would invest colonies in India. India, just like Southeast Asia, would be filled to the brim of these same natural resources. But since the Indian riches were more commonly known, China would invest a good amount of settlements and resource extractions in India. Later in the 1540s, China would embark on their most ambitious colonial voyage yet. This would be extremely risky for the Chinese, and it could make or break Chinese naval hegemony over the Indian Ocean. A few years during the decade, China would land in a newly documented continent, Africa, filled with all kinds of valuables like gold, ivory, animal skins, and most importantly, slaves. Unfortunately, I do see China becoming a major player in the East African slave trade, with slaves from East Africa getting sent to places like India and Indonesia. But at this point, many European nations like the English, Portuguese, and Dutch would start to invest in colonial projects in India and the East Indies. Since these European navies can't outmatch their Chinese counterparts, I could see Europe trying desperately to cooperate with the Ming. Later, by the turn of the 16th century, places like India and Indonesia will have sizable Chinese minorities at around 20 to 35%. Other places like Vietnam and Taiwan will have Chinese majorities at around 50 to 65%. China will most definitely be the richest and most powerful nation on earth, but two questions will arise. Will the Ming be conquered by the Qing? Will China stay dominant? Or will they be overshadowed by Europe? At this point, We've covered about a century of Chinese history, so it would be difficult for me to make any more realistic predictions from here on out. Make sure to subscribe to this channel as well as my Awwsome channel, which would be in the description and comment section. My TikTok and Twitter would also be in the description and comments.
This has been Awwsome History, and adios, amigos.